We look more closely now at President Obama's China meetings in two parts. First, secret talks began months ago that led to that historic deal between the two countries on cutting greenhouse gases. But today, there are still plenty of questions about how it will play out here, in China, and globally, and whether either side will be able to deliver on its pledges. Michael Oppenheimer is one of the many authors of the UN reports on climate change and a professor of geosciences and international affairs at the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton University. Welcome back to the NewsHour.
Thanks for having me.
How big a deal is this deal?
This is huge as far as I'm concerned, and there are basically three reasons. One, the science. The science tells us that to have a chance of avoiding the climate danger zone, we've got to get the world's emissions turned around, that is going down instead of going up, sometime in the 2020 to 2030 time span. The Chinese benchmark here of 2030 is consistent with that objective. The second reason is that if you get China and the US in the room, you have about 45% of global global warming emissions. If you add in the EU, which is already on the downward direction in terms of emissions, you've got about 60% of emissions. Think about the leadership factor involved in that. Other countries will have a harder time avoiding dealing with climate change with the three 800-pound gorillas together. And the third reason is, if China in particular is going to do this, and also the US, they're going to have to go big into the renewable energy markets where they've already staked out a position. That's going to help expand the markets, bring down the price of renewable energy, make it easier for everybody else to do this.
How did China come around on this? Was it domestic pressure? Was it international pressure?
With China, it's primarily domestic pressure. It's a realization, number one, they have a terrible air pollution problem, which has become a political issue. They have to do something about that. At the same time, they've got exposure to the climate change problem, and they're worried about their energy security issues. So they've been looking to diversify their energy sources, and as part of that, that means getting off the fossil fuels, which have been so dominant in the Chinese economy, for instance, coal.
So these two presidents shaking hands, it was kind of essential in that one cannot do it without the other.
They really need each other if they're going to deal with climate change. And I think it's very interesting that they've decided that among the panoply of issues that they could reach agreement on, this is one where they have enough of a common interest and enough of an intention that they're serious about moving forward.
Well, there certainly are a lot of other issues on the table, and this is one where something happened. But how hard is it for either country to meet these targets they have set for themselves? Especially, let's start with China. How hard is it for China to meet these, for instance, the peak emission targets?
For China, it's ambitious. There's no doubt about it. But China has shown an ability to move quickly on energy. Over the last 10 or 15 years, they've taken over the global production of photovoltaic cells, solar energy, and they've taken over virtually the global production of wind turbines. And in that way, they've helped other countries, particularly Germany, drive down their own emissions because they've been able to sell these products cheaply. So they can make a decision and then they can implement it. So I have no doubt that if this remains a political priority, China will be able to meet this goal.
Well, we're talking about political priorities. Let's come back here to the United States, where already we have heard Republican Senators Mitch McConnell saying today, this is not going to work. China's getting the deal. We're going to get caught on the short end of that stick. Can the political will fall short here?
I think that that's getting it backwards. Namely, for China, this is going to be tougher than it is for the U.S. For the U.S., what it means is staying the course on the regulations and the laws that are already in place, and then stretching those laws a little further to implement some new regulations. So we're already on the downward glide path. This means staying focused, and we can do it with technologies and measures that are already known and available.
But what if the political winds shift the other way, which it looks like if many people want them to, away from staying the course?
It could happen. One could envision the election of a president that isn't as friendly to doing something about this issue
or a Congress,
as Obama is.
Has just happened.
It's already happened. But you have to realize that once we set a national priority to move emissions down, the public is in favor of it. Every survey indicates that the public is in favor of strong action. They're waiting for leadership. And on top of that, now we've got China and the U.S. having mutually agreed to do this. It won't be easy, no matter who the president is, to back off a deal that they've made with China when there's a whole constellation of issues that we are reaching agreement on with China.
And a whole constellation of countries watching this action. Which ones would you be watching most closely?
I'd watch India. They're the next big developing country that hasn't really taken much of an interest in this issue. They're critical because their emissions are expected to grow quite a bit in the future. If this agreement is actually implemented, it'll go a long way to dragging India in, or maybe pulling them in with a little help, into doing something about climate change. Then beyond that, we look at countries like Brazil, Indonesia, et cetera.
Michael Oppenheimer of Princeton, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me here.